Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. I interview incredible people who've dedicated their lives to helping those who've been impacted by trauma. A big thank you to our sponsors and our guests who are supporting this show. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I'm very excited to have back Akilah Riley-Richardson. Akilah, welcome back.
Hi, good to be with
Hi.
you.
All right. Akilah is a couples therapist, published researcher, and relational healing facilitator with over 16 years of experience. She specializes in working with couples, including those practicing consensual non-monogamy and supporting sexual and racial minorities across the Caribbean and internationally. She's the founder of BIPOC Relational Healing Institute and creator of the Pride Model. She's the author of the recently published Marginalized Couples in Therapy Interventions for Healing from Systemic Trauma, which offers culturally responsive frameworks and practical tools for working with BIPOC and LGBTQI couples impacted by systemic oppression. All right, Akilah, obviously just a little bit about you, but before we get going, share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I am from Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm currently still in Trinidad and Tobago. So
Okay.
this is where I am and where I currently am.
All right. So we're going to get into the book. Before we do, just give our listeners, maybe who didn't hear the first episode you were on, just let's give them the nutshell, how all this started for you, how you got into this field.
I got into the field, so I'm trained in both psychology and social work. And then after that, I just did a lot of work in couples therapy and trauma work. And I felt that as I was sitting with couples and I was sitting with trauma and understanding my background in social work, that there needed to be more space and more room for the reality of people's systems around them, not just their families' systems, but the wider systems of racism, homophobia, xenophobia, ableism, all of these things. So I noticing that that felt like, let's say, a gap. Yeah, I I recognized that I wanted to deepen my work there. Yeah, and so that's
Okay.
how I got into it.
Let's go even a step back. How did therapy, psychology, when did that pull you?
At the age of about 18, I was going to actually head in the direction of business studies and business management. And I remember just sensing at the age of 18 that I wanted to make a big shift. Yeah. I wanted to make a big shift because I felt that in my life I'd be working with youth at one stage. Yeah, and doing therapy with youth. And that isn't a huge part of my practice right now, to be quite honest. But I did make this pivot, this direct turn into this, and I never regretted it, you know. And I think that therapy, as the years rolled by, therapy became a deeper love for me. Yeah, as the years rolled by, I think, especially let's say late in my 20s, when I started to get more in the 30s, I should say, when I started to get more into neuroscience and understanding the human brain. Yeah, I think I really appreciated that. I really appreciated being in this space where I could support and help people with an understanding of the human brain.
So you're in the field, you're sitting with people, you're working with people, and at some point or over the course of a period of time, you realize there's a gap. What what did that feel like for you? When get specific about I mean, obviously you're a person of color. One would think this is easy for you. You're checking all the boxes.
Yeah, yeah. I think when I was being trained in various couple modalities and assumptions were being made that seemed too global and too universal. And as I was looking at the various modalities, I felt that I was not hearing enough about people's systemic realities, particularly marginalized people's systemic realities. And I think it was during all of those various trainings that I felt that that voice was missing. And then when I thought about myself, especially as a Black woman and the way that I present, I realized that, you know what, some of what walks in my body, yeah, doesn't show up, or doesn't is not made present in the trainings. Yeah, I realized that I needed to be vocal since I myself was having my own experience of invisibility in these models.
When you say assumptions were being made, such as what?
That we all, so for example, there's certain understandings of what intimacy looks like, or there are certain understandings of what is healthy communication. Yeah. That does not take into consideration what we carry in our bodies. So for example, there's this stereotype of the angry Black woman. Yeah. And if you're communicating in an aggressive way, right, or in a very stern way, there are assumptions made that you're not being relational, you're not being caring, without an understanding of our historical realities and the ways in which aggression has been a tool of survival, the ways in which systemic trauma, right, feeds aggression, right, in people, and that could then cross over and spill over into relationship. For example, I was also looking at things like, you know, vulnerability and this assumption about what vulnerability means, right? Without an understanding of the fact that vulnerability looks different for people of color. For us, sometimes vulnerability can put you at severe risk, right? Because in our systemic reality, vulnerability can be an opportunity for harm. And I felt that these things were not being taken into account, the ways in which
Mm.
having to present yourself in a certain way to survive in the wider system, those things then cross over and come into the relationship. I felt that those things were not being adequately addressed, right, in our common or popular conventional models. And so I felt the need to make space for that. Interestingly enough, I was reflecting just now on a client of mine who is LGBTQI, and that client was, talking about just and this client is mentioned in the book, all right, with because I have permission to share. This person mentioned just feeling this heightened sense of rejection in their relationship, and that this degree of rejection sensitivity was actually coming from the wider system, and sipping in and finding itself seeping in, sorry, into the relationship. So I felt that these external realities were not finding themselves in the relation within models for our understanding of people, and that certain relational patterns which were being seen as unhealthy, that were just a reaction to historical and systemic trauma.
You mentioned vulnerability, and of course, that is kind of a buzzword in our culture right now, and I think in therapy more specifically, and a lot of people use that in kind of a currency way. We need to be more vulnerable. Um, w- h- Specifically, how might that be tone deaf when used uh, for marginalized people?
How can current therapies be tone deaf, is what you're asking?
The word vulnerability.
The vulnerability, sorry, I
Yeah.
missed that. Um, I think it assumes that vulnerability is a strength, yeah, and openness is a strength, and it does not take into consideration that vulnerability in systems that are designed to harm, yeah, can actually put you at great deal of risk. And I think that there are understandings of what vulnerability looks like, and it looks different for different kinds of people. Yeah. For some people, just naming and being brave is vulnerability.
Mhm.
Yeah. For some people, actually being able to actually withholding sometimes is vulnerability. I know that might sound strange, yeah, but there are different ways in which it manifests for different kinds of people. There's no standard definition of vulnerability, yeah. I can say, for example, for me, as a Black woman, like I remember reading, I can't remember the text, but in this text talking about the ways in which Black women on the plantation were taught to interact with their children, right? And that on the plantation, they felt that they had to be harsh and shame their children in order to protect them. Because if they would criticize their children or demean them, it means that they protect their children from being taken from massa, by massa, sorry.
Well,
And so we're seeing there that even the ability to express love and be vulnerable about one's tender feelings, right, could be seen as being risky. Now imagine that particular way of being passed on from generation to generation to generation. It would then mean that we have to construct our own understanding of vulnerability. Yeah,
well,
our own feelings around vulnerability. Yeah. And so I conventional therapies sometimes don't take into consideration these historical shapings, yeah, and the ways in which these things have to be in the ways in which these things are transformed over time because of the reality of one's circumstances. So yes, I think for me, whenever I'm sitting with people, especially people who experience historical trauma, right, I am very mindful of what is their circumstance and how do I redefine the ask. So if I'm talking about sharing, vulnerability, bravery, and setting boundaries, even setting boundaries can be hard in a system
mm,
where boundaries are not boundaries are a relational risk in the outside world, right? Sometimes having a lot of boundaries keeps you safe. Sometimes opening up yourself keeps you safe when you are a marginalized person, right? We don't have the ability to always live in our truth because sometimes living in your truth could get you killed. Sometimes standing up and saying no and being assertive can get you killed, literally. And then when a therapist is asking you to erect healthy boundaries with your partner, they're making an assumption that you have a tool within you that is being disrupted and discredited by the external system all of the time.
wow, it feels like a whole shifting of not just perspective, like a paradigm shift
Yes,
of
yes,
how one needs a therapist needs to walk into the room with uh, a worldview that needs to be rejiggered and reformed and reframed.
yes,
I
yes,
mean,
yeah,
that is what does that mean to be, and obviously this is different for different people, but I can imagine I can't imagine what it means to be a client who maybe is marginalized and working with a therapist who doesn't have this, maybe has quote unquote good intentions, but is not informed in this way.
yeah, yeah. I think so. And I remember working with a client once, and we were speaking about the goal setting and imagination, and she said, I never thought I had space to imagine. I was too busy trying to survive. Yeah. And I'm using that as an example of the ways in which sometimes when we make asks of clients and they're like, but this is not a part of my reality. Yeah, this is not a part of. In fact, your ask is even violating me. And make no make no mistake. Sorry, I myself because I'm a cisgender person. I work with the LGBT community, but I'm cisgender, and I too have made errors coming from a very privileged cis place. Yeah, there are certain. I remember once working with a trans woman who was and this too is part of, like, in my work I do a lot of recordings of videos, etc., with people who give full permission to be recorded, give informed consent for teaching purposes. And in one of my videos, I was working with a couple, a trans woman and a non-binary partner. And in order to hold space for the non-binary partner around issues surrounding race, I asked the trans woman to just contain a bit, and because they were emoting a lot, and the non-binary partner felt that they couldn't share. So we're just working on containment a little bit, and not realizing after that I had wounded that person because they felt that as a trans woman, they had experienced so many times in their life when they were told that they could not emote or they should not emote because only cis women could emote. And
Mm,
there I was blind, yeah, to what I was asking, not taking into consideration this person's reality. So I want to say that it's not bad evil or ill-intentioned therapists who have blind spots. We all do. Your privilege, right, what I call your relational privilege, inevitably creates blind
Mm.
spots. And so your own humility and openness becomes imperative as a result of that. Your willingness to listen and not just tolerate, but accept, include, yeah, that becomes necessary. Yeah.
You in the some of the beginning pages of this book, you ask some amazing questions. One is, and fill in the blanks here, correct me if I'm wrong, but you start to say, um, many therapists begin from a very, beneficial way, asking questions such as, it's not what's wrong with you, it's but what happened to you. And you say there's kind of a more pertinent question than that,
Mhm.
and it's what's continuing
But still
to
continuing to
happening to you.
happen.
Talk to us about that difference.
Yeah, and that's the wisdom of Thema Bryant, huh? And I'm so glad you raised that because I'm thinking about it now. You know, sometimes when we're working in therapy with couples or individuals, we work with them as if the trauma has passed, it's done, and we want to, we act like it's finished. And the thing with systemic trauma is that it's continuous, it's pervasive, it's chronic, and that has to be taken into account. Because as I work with someone, then I might see a shift, and then the week after, this person is back in the same place because the
Mm,
system is continuing its onslaught. And I think that means we have to redefine how we do trauma work. There is no endpoint and completion. And I know for a product, I think one of the things about our industry is that we're very product oriented as opposed to process oriented. Yeah. We have all these models and things that we do, and then we assume at the end of it we should see less of this and less of that. And we
right.
have all these indicators and markers. And I have to say, for me, I've struggled in various settings with that kind of way of understanding human beings. That, if the work is done quick or well, there'll be less reports of this and less reports of that. And it's important, I think, for us to reimagine trauma therapy. And I was listening to Robert Schwartz the other day in a trauma training with Therapy Wisdom, and he was saying, we have to. This is a paraphrase, but we have to give up the need to be helpful, and that provocative statement stayed with me, because we're so preoccupied with being helpful and getting outcomes and getting results that over time, we, myself included, I'm certainly not excluded from this. Over time, we forget how to just be with people in the reality in
Mm,
which they live. Yeah. And to not see a person as something to shift and retool, but a person to just be with and support. And support takes different shapes, especially when you're working with trauma therapy. And we have to remove, see, notions of things like resistance and all these different things. Those things have to shift and change when people are continuously being affected. In fact, when people, I think one of the reasons we need to shift this is because when persons see themselves being affected in this particular way, yeah, you will see that sometimes if they're not changing or they're not feeling better, they might begin to think, oh, they're not working hard enough. Yeah, and I have to say to people, it's not that you're not working hard enough. You're being affected by a wider system
mm,
continuously.
right. Right. When you sat down to write this book, what did you want to say? How did you put it together? What was important for you to get into this?
What was important for me to get into this, if I'm to be very transparent, I didn't want to put forward something that seemed like the answer. Yeah. I I want to be very honest, guy. I this is my understanding of how to do this work, but I am not proposing that this is the way to do the work. I don't think we can reduce human beings to just being amenable to our ways of working. And I wanted to make sure that in this work I continue to hold, sorry, a curious position. Yeah. Um and it I wanted it to be accepted that this work is hard. And as I rumble with people through the work, I take my time and take a not knowing stance, take a power with stance, as Julianne Taylor Shaw would talk about often in her own work, because it I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but what I'm trying to say is that a huge part of my ethos is liberation, and I cannot hope for liberation without practicing liberation in a therapeutic space. And the way I practice that is with being curious, seen in an egalitarian relationship, just being in that. Yeah.
When you began work seeing clients, talk about how your perspective has shifted now with the knowledge that you have and you put into this book, how you would sit with clients.
I sit in the liminal space better. The liminal space is the between space. And in the book, I talk about that, right? I talk about grief and liminality. I talk about the ways in which when you've put forward all the best efforts and it's not taking shape, it's not taking hold because of the wider system and what it's doing. I've learned to sit in that grief with tenderness for myself and tenderness for the person. I think my clients have taught me that. My clients have taught me humility. Yeah, they've taught me this thing may not work and it's okay because there's something else happening. And they've taught me, and you and I have spoken before a little bit about this, but they've taught me the reality of discovery. Yeah. That therapy is a place to discover. Therapy is a place to learn. Therapy is not just a place to take models and impose. Therapy is a learning space. Yeah. So even I'd say I published this book, and then there's some ideas that came to me after that I wish I had there before. Because as I meet with people and I think through the work, I'm constantly learning. So therapy and living and teaching and training helps me to update. And so my clients being working with marginalized people has taught me to update. It has taught me curiosity, humility. It's taught me bravery. I've had to say in some instances, this is a system, right? This is not you, right? And I've had to be brave about that. Yeah.
What do you mean? Why?
Because one of the things I say about systemic trauma is that systemic trauma is often disenfranchised, it's invisibilized. That when persons experience acts of racism, xenophobia, etc., they often find it very difficult to be able to have that be heard because persons around them try to dismiss it. And so it
Mm.
is my responsibility in the therapeutic space to name it. It's my responsibility to let you know that you're not making this up. What you, as Resma Menakem says, what you think is happening really is happening. This is real. And that takes courage. That takes a lot of courage. Part of the reason it takes courage is because I too am a Black woman and I am feeling the helplessness sometimes of not seeing things shift, especially in these times. And it takes courage for me to name the thing that might know might not shift. Because as I name the system, I'm actually naming the domains of powerlessness and helplessness as well that exist for so many of us. So it takes bravery for me to name it, and it also takes bravery for me to face the helplessness and the powerlessness that you naturally feel when you realize that this is a thing bigger than you.
When you think of this book, I mean, obviously everything you're saying is vitally important. What are you hoping therapists will get from this work?
I am hoping that there are a few things I'm hoping. I'm hoping that when they see dynamics between couples, that they ask themselves what else is in the room. It isn't always systemic trauma, it isn't. But sometimes it's really important for you to ask yourself what else is in the room. I'm hoping that when they realize what else is there, they're brave enough to name it for the couples. I'm hoping that they support couples in normalizing their tensions that result from systemic trauma, that they don't pathologize the couple, that they pathologize the system,
Mm.
that they assign the blame where the blame is due. Yeah. And I'm hoping that they support. There's a part of my work that I call relational declarations. I'm hoping that they support clients in creating relational declarations that are rooted with an understanding of the systems that they occupy.
What might be an answer to the question, what else is in the room?
System, the history, the invisibilization, the the therapist's ignorance is in the room sometimes. The therapist's biases, the therapist's own privilege and positionality. All of those things are shaping how the therapeutic space is emerging. And that you can feel when couples are debating with each other in the room, and all that's needed is a therapist understanding and a communication of that understanding that could be a safe container. And sometimes when we don't communicate the understanding or name the system, it doesn't create the safe space for them to be able to pivot and look at what's happening. So all of those things are in the room and shaping the experience.
In in the book, you have quotes from some people you worked with. Um, I'm wondering if you can share one of those or some of those ones that stood out to you, a client who stood out to you, who kind of, in an emblematic way, symbolizes the work in this book.
There's a quote very early, and I think the person says it's a system of questions. And that always stood out to me, that when you are an LGBTQI person or you're BIPOC, that you're always in a system of questions, always wondering, am I being harmed? Am I not being harmed? Or how should I navigate this? Or how should I do this to keep myself safe? You just can't walk through the world comfortably and confidently. You always have to be questioning what's happening to you and how you're going to navigate that. And living in questioning then becomes your modus operandi. Yeah. And I want you to think about how living in questioning then shows up in relationships. Yeah.
Mm. It almost feels like they're not playing with the same deck of
Not
cards,
playing
or
with the
they're
same
swimming in a completely different
in a
ocean,
very different ocean.
which in and of itself is like a mind fuck. How do you be yourself? How do you that just be authentic? That even seems
Mhm.
like be vulnerable, be more vulnerable. What do you
Mhm.
mean, be myself?
Mhm. Yeah, you're right. And this isn't the experience of every single marginalized person, right? I want to be clear that I'm not making generalized statements. Everybody's having different experiences, but you're right. I think, but I really want to stress that these conventional definitions of intimacy and relationality, I, we really need to tailor them to hold space. We really need to account for what I call relational privilege, that the ability to live in your truth, the ability to feel safe, the ability to have a sense of self worth, the ability to feel belonging in the world, all those things affect your ability to navigate relationships. And those things are not only shaped by your family of origin, they're also shaped by the wider system. So I can't abide by your definition of connectedness if it is that I have these circumstances that shape relational themes in my body or every day.
Well, as we kind of wind down here, when you were working with couples, a couple walks into your room, what are you doing? What are you looking for? Are you not looking for anything? You're just being. What's going on for you?
I'm curious. I'm sitting. I am, in the book I talk about using the biome, right? I am sitting from a place of openness. So the O in openness is a part of the biome, right? I'm sitting from a place of openness, being willing to hear. I'm mapping and looking at relational patterns, right? And then I'm considering where you are, your social location, all these things that I'm looking at. And when I'm thinking through the lens of the work of wicked marginalized people, I'm asking myself about what are the habits of survival, and that's mentioned as well in the book. What are the habits of survival that exist outside that are probably showing up here? Yeah, I'm asking myself, where does this person sit in terms of their degree of relational privilege? Like, I actually have a scoring thing that I can use. Yeah, where does this person sit? And how does it shape their current reality? So, all of these little things are things that I am thinking about and shaping and being aware of. And I'm also, it containment is necessary as well because I don't want to rush in to diagnose. So, because I think that becoming overly diagnostic is not emancipatory or liberatory. Remember, I spoke about the fact that the couple space, therapeutic space, sorry, should be a space of liberation. So, not rushing to diagnosis and that kind of thing becomes more important there as well. So, I'm looking at dynamics and I'm mapping and I'm thinking about habits of survival and relational privilege.
What is relational privilege?
It's the ability to navigate relationships from a place of self trust, yeah, and a place of safety. Those are two things I talk about a lot. Yeah. That ability to do that in itself is relational privilege. And for me, that ability comes from the wider system. So when I talk about what is relational privilege, it is the ability to navigate intimate partner relationships that is affected by your social location, your historical reality, and not your personal historical reality, the historical reality of your people and the wider system. Yeah, so it's the themes of relationality that the wider system sows in you.
The book is called Marginalized Couples and Therapy Interventions for Healing from Systemic Trauma. It is out. Keela, when I remember when I first interviewed you, and I was blown away by you and your just you exude this humanness, this human kindness, that is so inspiring. And I remember getting off that interview and I was like, "Oh my god, this is what it's about for me." You know, y y this presence you have that you bring into your work is very inspiring.
Mm.
I love it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
it's amazing. All right, how do people learn more about you and the book? It's the best way.
Oh, but they can check me out on my website, akilah There is a link there. You could buy it as well off of Bookshop, Amazon. You could go straight to Norton's website. It's available. Once you Google it, you can definitely find it. And as I said, if you want to learn more about me, you can find me at akilah You can shoot me an email at info@akilah as well. Also, on my website, you could also click that little contact me button and
Okay.
keep in touch.
Okay. We'll have all that linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Keela, love it. Love you. Love love having you on here. Pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Okay, bye bye.